Welcome to BAI, the Soulcast, episode 10. We have a special episode for you today. On May 20th, 2020, Beth Am Israel's Board of Directors unanimously approved a proposal coming from an ad hoc committee wanting to officially increase our involvement in social justice work. This proposal, a now approved motion, encourages congregants to engage in activities sponsored by organizations we have partnered with. Fair Districts PA is one of those organizations with whom we've joined forces, and we are so excited to welcome them today. Fair Districts PA is a nonpartisan, statewide coalition of individuals working to create a process for redistricting that is transparent, impartial, and fair. Fair Districts PA is a project started in 2015 by the Pennsylvania League of Women Voters. Today we're joined by Rafferty, the Montgomery County lead of Fair Districts PA, and Jamil Khan, our very own Jamil Khan, our social justice liaison for Fair Districts PA. Welcome, Rich and Jamil. The floor is yours.
Well, thanks for being here, Rich. It was great having you talk to the congregation a few weeks ago. Hopefully, some more people can get to know you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with Fair Districts and why this issue is so important to you?
I joined Fair Districts of PA not out of any lifelong driven ambition. It was far more practical. A couple of years ago, I think it was 2017, actually, I retired from full-time employment. And my wife was faced with the dreaded notion of me being home quite often. I had a couple of part-time things lined up, but I was still going to be home. I was someone who was traveled and was away anywhere from 8 to 10 days per month. And my wife was thriving in that environment. And now all of a sudden the prospects dimmed for her. So it was a natural outcome of retiring. You ask yourself the question, what else can I do? And more importantly, and that's something I hope that I've had most of my life, is how can I be useful? And so the irony was my wife went to a presentation by our leader, Carol Kuhnholm, in our local area. We're over in the Plymouth White Marsh area. And she came home and said, hey, that was kind of interesting. And I didn't know two things about it. Like a lot of folks, we talking about this map drawing, electoral districts, gerrymandering. What are we talking about? You've heard it a little bit in the background. But anyway, I said, well, let me go check it out if you think it's interesting. And I went a couple weeks later to another presentation over Bryn Mawr University and was blown away. There was about 400 people in the audience that night. It was a very effective presentation, and it answered one primary question: can I help? And I answered that myself, saying, I think I can, because it was very clear Montgomery County at the time was just getting organized, and they were looking for more volunteers, and they very explicitly asked for help. And I came from a pretty diverse working background. I thought I can help with a lot of different things, whatever they want. 2 days later, I got a name, I signed up and then got a name, and I talked to a young lady, Kate Doyle, who was at the time, the Montgomery County lead for Fair Districts, just getting started. And we talked for about 45 minutes on the phone. I said, okay. I went to another meeting she had the following week, and I signed up. And what I signed up for was what was called outreach. They needed somebody to take the lead to get the message out about fair districts and the dangers of gerrymandering in a run-amok legislature in Pennsylvania. Didn't know too much about it, but I immersed myself fully with both Fair Districts materials, League of Women Voters materials, but just a lot of reading on my own. No coincidence, way back when I was in college, my first couple of years, I was a pre-law and political science major. So I've always been interested, worked in a couple of campaigns in my 20s. Was there mostly I signed up mostly because it was a good party atmosphere. Party, small p. Didn't turn out to be much like that at all. It was just a lot of grunt work, as I found. And then disappeared, like a lot of people, careers take you away to different worlds. And so once I retired, or even before I was retired, thinking, what else can I do to make life interesting for myself? And again, how can I be useful? And the good thing about the Fair Districts issue was that it wasn't partisan political. Once I got educated, I realized that this issue, which in our understanding, our take, is that it is a fundamental flaw in how our politics can and often does work. But it was also bad behavior by both parties. When you looked at all of the terrible examples state by state in the country, I said, oh my God, this is a real problem. In Pennsylvania, there hasn't been a whole lot of angels, doing the right things for the last 30 plus years. And then you looked at Maryland, which has been a terrible example, and some other states. So I said, okay, I can help with this. This is a broad-based issue. It's not picking sides. And what really helped me sleep well at night was that what we're fighting for and the way that we're trying to change things, I can sleep at night because I'm not taking one side. I don't have to go dirty or go deep in a very negative way to hurt people in order to help others. This was, if we do the right thing, this is a pure bottoms up kind of solution. And I thought I can sleep well at night. And to be very honest with you, I have slept well at night because what we're doing is the right thing. Now, are we going to win? We can talk about that later. But that really was the origins of it. And what I was surprised to find when I signed up and really threw myself in the organization in Montgomery County was that I saw volunteers, citizen volunteers from all political perspectives. That was a wonderful revelation that people were coming from left, center, and right. And that was a delight. And I was very happy. And what I did was throw myself into the issue of outreach, real retail outreach, because much like you, there's no money, there's no magic, there's no throngs of volunteers and big budgets to get your message out. There was no money. So all I did was say, okay, who do we have to reach with our message? And I had some volunteers, some team members joined, and we sat down, we went to libraries, talked as low as we could, 3 or 4 meetings in a row, local libraries, with 4 or 5 individuals. And we plotted out all the different kinds of organizations that we needed to get our message to. And that was, I mentioned houses of faith, business organizations, senior communities, schools and education related. So we had about 9 or 10 different categories that we reached out. And then we simply did the dreaded internet searches of saying, let's organize and get a list of every potential contact, every organization that fits under this category. And we spent about the first 6 to 9 months just making phone calls, just sending out mailers, going on websites, et cetera, to get in front of people, which what we thought was a very, very critical issue. But we knew that the difficulty was that when we talk about redistricting or gerrymandering, the problem number 1 is that people don't know much about it. Number 2 is that it's a 10-year event, every 10-year event, which is a problem because it disappears from the news cycles very quickly. And then number 3, geez, this is kind of boring. So how do we spice this up a little bit and make it? And what we decided to do then was try to personalize this, the message, and for our audience in particular, to personalize it and let people know exactly why it's a problem for you, whatever target audience. So the reality is that's how I got involved. That was 2017, so that's 3 or 4 years now of banging away. And we still have, amazingly, statewide, still a wonderful coalition. We still have about 5,000 to 6,000 very active volunteers. I can tell you in Montgomery County alone, I've got about 1,300 people who have signed up and are regular subscribers to Fair District's newsletters or my emails, whatever it may be, just to keep people abridged. And we use that as a base to activate people, say, let's go, we need your help. We don't need to keep hurling information at you. Once you've got a bit of information, what we focus on, and what I certainly focus on in Montgomery County, is, hey, I need your help. We're going to do we need your event. We're going to stage an event. We need volunteers. We need constituents to get out and talk to legislators. So there's all kinds of the usual array of actions that we're asking people to do. And the biggest, I would say the most illuminating moment that I had with this activism for me personally was, I remember going on my very first legislator visit. And, you know, so I don't know, what if I'm asked something that I don't know, I'm going to sound dumb, I'm going to blow it. Because what we're asking when we go to legislators is for their support. If we have legislation A or legislation B, we're asking for them to engage and support us. But the revelation that I had, it took 2 or 3, nervousness slowly went away, was that these legislators work for us. And in many cases, they don't know half as much as I know, or what our constituents have been educated on. What we've learned is that the legislators will be responsive. And we talk about state legislators, because a state legislator, we always tell a state rep, for example, there's 203 state reps in Pennsylvania. Now that's a lot. In Montgomery County, we have 18. Now we'll talk later about the fact that we don't need 18, but based on how the maps were drawn, we got 18. So that was interesting. But what we learned was that if you educate your constituents and get them a little fired up, it didn't take much to get them motivated to go directly to their legislators, because once we explained what the problem was, and they see the outrageous process and the indignities, the unfairness, literally the corruption in many cases of what was happening, it doesn't take much to get people fired up. You give them a couple talking points and away they go, talking with their legislators. And what we learned as well is that once legislators see an active, educated constituent base, that's who they pay attention to. So that was the big lesson, and I keep repeating it with constituents that I work with, because one of my biggest things now, and has been, is legislator outreach. We are talking and engaging. They know who we are. Even though we're a group that has no money, no budget, no mass media except for Facebooks and a website like tens of thousands of other organizations. So when you don't have that mass media presence or that social media clout, you really have to engage in person with your legislators. The good news is a state rep represents about 60,000 citizens typically in Pennsylvania. What I learned was that about a typical election, about 20-some thousand votes every 2 years for a state rep. Of that amount, maybe the rep gets 10,500. Of that amount of 10,500, a couple hundred are active and engaging. And what we learned, that's who the legislators pay attention to. The people who call, the people who write, the people who visit, the people who stay engaged and respectfully but professionally engage their legislator, they're the ones they pay attention to. So that was a wonderful lesson that I learned and that I try to ingrain with our constituents who are also actively involved, or even just want to engage once a year or twice a year in a specific. And what we also learned was that the legislators remember who we are. And if it's other groups, whether it's Ceasefire or any other group, the legislators take note and remember, who were they talking to? Who were those groups? I better keep an eye out for them, and I better keep, an open invitation almost all the time with these folks, even if I disagree and won't necessarily support them. But that was a wonderful lesson that I certainly learned coming in ice cold, just like most of our constituent volunteers as well, who were coming in because once they understood it, said, we've got to do something about this. So that was a wonderful lesson, and certainly something that we stick with from this point forward. So that's a long answer to how I got involved with fair districts, but that is really what the redeeming value has been. Even though we haven't had the legislative victory yet and the real reforms have not been realized, that's been a wonderful revelation for not just myself, but for most of the constituents who have engaged.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a wonderful lesson for all of the work
It
that
sure is. Yep.
our community is either has engaged on personally or is planning to engage on through Bethom or just in their own life for any issues that kind of
That's right.
motivate them. Um, uh, I mean, I think the way you break it down with those numbers really makes it seem, um, you know, uh, it shows how much of an impact you can have as an individual to be one of those 100 or 200 people, whereas it may seem overwhelming if you don't break it down that way. So,
That's right.
I appreciate that. That's really, that's inspiring. So yeah, what, maybe you could, break down, like you said, you warned us that the issue of gerrymandering is boring. But you've also emphasized how important it is. So, break it down for us.
Well, in Pennsylvania, again, something I learned to my dismay, and everyone else who's been educated to their dismay as well, is that in Pennsylvania, the drawing of electoral maps, obviously the basics is it happens every 10 years. And what the problem is in Pennsylvania is twofold. One is that it's drawn by politicians, more specifically by 5 politicians. And they're vested. So you have the leaders of the majority party in the House, minority party in the House. This is Harrisburg, not Washington. The majority party in the Senate, the minority party in the Senate, and then the 5th person who is typically picked is a political person typically picked by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, but it is a politician of some kind, even if it's not an elected politician, but it's an insider. So it's a pure insider's game. So that's number one, is the who, which is a problem, 5 leaders. Number 2 is that it's a closed door process. This is done secretly. I mean, there's no getting around it. It's done quietly behind closed doors with preordained results already cemented early in the process. Again, it's all geared, if you're the majority party and you're controlling drawing the maps, you're writing down the objective is to retain the majority for the next 5 election cycles, the next 10-year cycle. So you know that. And then thirdly, the other thing that we learned is that it is a high science. There's the software to draw maps, and we'll talk about the number of maps in a minute, but the software has become very sophisticated in the last 2 cycles in the last 20 years. So the software has made map drawing easier in a sense, but more insidiously, it's because of the nature of the data, the voter data that is used to draw those maps. So voter data, what I mean is that we're not saying, okay, I know exactly who Jamil voted for, the last 3 cycles or so. It's not quite that. But what it is it's at precinct or ward level, and it's actually at the street level within voting precincts or wards. So they profiles are drawn street by street within districts. Now, it's not every district. I think I mentioned before, I was born and raised in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is and has been Democratic for certainly my lifetime. So it's very hard to manipulate drawing maps in a one-party area. But in Montgomery County and many other parts of Pennsylvania where there's competition, that the majority party goes out of their way and using the data, what we call the precinct or ward level data, defines exactly where the problems lie. When the objective is to retain majority control in District X, Y, or Z, you can draw a map in such a way that you can still maintain a majority control. And one of the examples I use is Upper Dublin. Upper Dublin is in Montgomery County, is about 27,000 people live in Upper Dublin. Upper Dublin registration is about 52% Democratic, about 45% Republican, and the remainder is independents. And what happened in 2011 when the maps were drawn, and this was the state rep map, all of a sudden Upper Dublin got carved into 3 electoral districts for a state rep. A state rep represents 60,000 people. Upper Dublin got carved into a 10, an 8, and another 8 or something like that, where magically, mysteriously, 2 Republicans maintained control. and one Democrat, who happened to be Madeline Dean, got the leftover of Upper Dublin, and the people of Upper Dublin had no clue what went down because it was a secretive process. And Upper Dublin, in this case, very competitive, was carved up at a street by street by street level. So that's the kind of nonsense that went on in many, many areas. Again, politicians drawing the maps, secret process, high-powered map drawing software, and street level, if you will, precinct background that gives you an exact profile of where the votes are, where the likely voters are for the next 10 years. So again, when you walk in, you're the boss and said, we need to maintain control in legislature X, Y, or Z for the next 10 years. Give me some maps that will make that happen. And this nonsense goes down. And think about the volume involved. The only thing that gets attention is the congressional maps. We send 18 people to Washington. We probably will have 17 based on the census in 2021. Okay. So we'll see how that goes. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court corrected an egregious, ridiculous maps. And I was part of one of the ridiculous maps. It was embarrassing stuff when you see this stuff. And you look at these maps and go, how do these people get away with this? That's because it's secret, and then it's issued. No governor votes. The legislature really doesn't vote. They really don't, because the leaders are driving the bus and saying, if you want to be with us the next 10 years, you'll go along to get along. So that's really how things happen. So we saw that happen, but think about that, 203 state rep maps. It's hard work in the sense that you've got to make sure that you always have a safe number if you're going to be drawing, majority votes for the next 8 to 10 year voting cycles. So you've got to make sure that you have as much as possible majority, a comfortable majority. There's 50 state Senate seats. Pennsylvania, again, particularly Montgomery County, we got carved up. I'll just give you 2 examples. Based on population in 2011, Montgomery County should have had 13 state reps. We got 18, and sliced and diced, and half of those districts also were part of other counties. Berks, Bucks, Delco, Philadelphia. So we got chopped up real well. State senators, we should have about 3. We had 6. How about that? Again, sliced and diced with chunks of other counties. And then the worst one, which happened in 2011 as well, was that we should have had basically 1 dedicated congressperson. We got 5. And not 1 lived in Montgomery County. So for the 5 guys who drew the maps in 2011, and remember the Dems, who at this point were the minority party in 2011, they're also cutting deals. They were the minority, but they're saying, geez, what's my seat? What's my map look like? Okay, I'm good with that. Bob Brady, representing Philadelphia, cut a deal in 2011 to ensure that his congressional district and a couple others in Philadelphia were comfortably not messed with. So they guaranteed their reelections and then said, goodbye, we got to leave. So this is the kind of nonsense that goes on, and it's all revealed, or some of it's revealed after the fact when it's too late and things have already gone down. So when you explain this to people, closed door process, politicians drawing their own maps, high-powered software, street level voting, precinct data, and there's nothing you can do about it, buddy. Kind of gets folks upset. And that's what we focused on. I know when I've done 50, 60, a lot of presentations, and from 5 to 50 people, that's typically what we would get. Our job was to get people upset, get them riled up a little bit. It wasn't too hard to do. Again, it's boring, but when you explain how you are getting hosed wherever you live, and those other people are locking in their reelections for the next N number of cycles, it's not hard to get outraged. And instead of getting upset, we say, take action. Here's the phone number of your state legislator. Here's the phone number of your state senator. Call them tonight if you want, but call them tomorrow and let them know that you're pissed, and let them know that you got to do something about this. And we're going to be watching what you do. So we've also worked very hard in fair districts to let the legislators know that we are making this an election issue. And that's what we've done in a little bit in 2016, and certainly big in 2018, and we're doing it in 2020. Now, we're also realistic enough to know that our message of redistricting reform is a tough one in 2020. There's so much emotion, as you know, as we all know. It's presidential elections, it's Senate, it's Washington driven right now. So we know that our issue, which is a Harrisburg issue, will be difficult. But nonetheless, we never can let up. And we again, our focus is on state legislators. We're not really talking to the U.S., our people in Washington, because they benefit or get hurt by it, and they can influence. But they have bigger issues, and we want them focused on other issues. But we focus on the state legislators here to say, we're watching, we're talking to your constituents, and we're telling your constituents to pay attention to your behavior and to your actions and to the results of reform. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm glad you mentioned, put such an emphasis on the state legislators, because, I'll talk to people and they'll say, maybe they were in a district like that you live in, or a congressional district that I live in, like the 7th, that completely got redrawn after the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision. And so they say, well, didn't the Pennsylvania Supreme Court take care of this? Aren't we done? That's not the case. That's right. Especially the scale of which you discussed, 203 state representative maps.
Like I said, we're going to have 270 maps.
Wow.
To be drawn. There's a lot of damage that can be done. Now, what we do know is that what we hear from legislators is that, what went down in 2011, and it was bad in 2001, it was also bad, I learned, in 1991, because of the nature of no one's looking. We've got, the natural human instinct. One of the questions I always ask when I'm in front of groups as well is, I say, let me ask you a question. If you were one of those powerful leaders and you were given this hand of secret process, total control, power retention for the next 10 years, what would you do? What would you do? So it's real human frailty we're talking about here.
So then what's the solution?
Well, the solution, of course, is, I always tell people, just hang on, the next 63 PowerPoint slides will tell you what the solution is here. But no, we say we have to, the irony, of course, is that we have to fix the problem from within. That's the irony, is that where the problem lies today is also where the solution. We don't want, and League of Women Voters, as well as Fair Districts, have been very clear that the courts are not a solution. I don't want judges drawing maps, personally. Just like a lot of the country from time to time says, oh no, we don't want activist judges, unless it's an issue that they want to fix that I believe in, where most people live, but we don't want judges drawing. The legislature today has that power in Harrisburg to draw those. We just want to say, let's do it the right way. And the first thing we said was, this is an inherent conflict of interest. So let's take away your power to draw these maps. And of course, that was met with resistance, but interesting enough, with stiff resistance, really just from leadership of both parties in Harrisburg. That was another lesson to learn, that there wasn't good guys and bad guys. There's just people who want to retain power. That's what we learned. And all we're asking is those folks to give it up. Now, is that so much to ask? Please give up your power and hand it over. So what we did,
you probably got crickets when you ask people. You probably got crickets when you ask people to give up their power.
That's right. Except from what I'll call the worker bees. The state legislators, or whether it's reps or senators who they're new, or they have no real power. They're not a committee chair. They're not a minority leader, majority leader. The power is really in the hands of a few. 253 legislators out there, but it's really about 6 guys. It's about 6 guys who have all the real power. They control what gets voted on. It's just amazing. And that's a horrible thing that we've learned as well. So again, but another lesson, there's so many to learn, but another lesson was the phrase we started using after a while is we have to bring not just light, but heat on these leaders, because otherwise they're thriving. They're thriving in darkness. They're thriving with citizen ignorance, or the fact that we're so wrapped up. It's frustrating today. You can imagine whatever, our redistricting issue, there are dozens of worthwhile reform issues out there, but they don't get that light and or heat because legislators, particularly in Harrisburg, know that all the noise, all the misdirection is focused down in Washington. The drama, the melodrama, I'll call it, of Washington, instead of the critical things. That's, again, the lessons learned that we're happy to share, is that so many important things in folks' day-to-day lives, folks in Pennsylvania, is happening based on Harrisburg decisions. Healthcare, education, housing, medical. You just go down this laundry list. It really happens at the state level. I didn't know much of this as well, of course, but then you see these critical issues. So what we're doing is trying to wave to everybody, saying, shut down that website, turn off the TV, and refocus where the news cycles are very light, and that's in what's happening in Harrisburg. So that's a frustrating, and I think for anybody, any cause that's working hard to change things in the state, getting that energy over to Harrisburg is critical. You can't win without it.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of, like you ran through all the issues. I mean, there are a lot, gun control. There are a lot of issues that get voted on in Harrisburg, and people will be surprised, I think, how powerful special interests have really,
That's right.
created some laws here in Pennsylvania that are pretty extreme across the board. But we're focusing, at least for now, on your issue or the issue that we're discussing. But so people are very focused on the election, understandably so. It's very important. But there is actually a deadline coming up in order to make a difference with this gerrymandering issue. So what are some things that are going on down in Harrisburg right now? There's been a little bit of movement, lately, I think, on this. And what can Beth Amers do to get involved?
Well, I would say this, and again, it's certainly a question of timing. What we've learned is that the legislation that we fought for from 2016 onwards, whose focus was on the establishment of an independent citizens commission modeled on other states, is dead. It's not going to happen this cycle. It just isn't going to happen. So we lost that one. It was enough. Again, we learned that delay works for those in power. It does. Okay, so we didn't get, even though we had, in 2 different legislative sessions, we had a majority of legislators in the House in particular who signed on and so-called co-sponsored our legislation. Leadership, both parties not interested. We got delayed until time ran out. So what we did was change our strategy earlier this year to go to, okay, you guys win the Independent Citizens Commission war for this 10-year cycle. So what we did was craft new legislation that focused on behavior and what we called common sense behavior. But the biggest issue, there's a number of good talking points, but the number one issue was transparency. Okay, so that same group of 5 leaders is going to get together. The calendar doesn't change. In 2021, roughly in that May 2021 cycle, they will begin to organize once the census results are finalized. So what we've been working on since the summer is that new legislation. I think I mentioned it last time. It's HB 2638. And then the same legislation is called Senate Bill SB 1242, which is geared on transparency and other metrics geared for responsiveness to citizen input. That's transparency. Remember we talked about bringing heat, light and heat. At least we need some light. And then we can do the heat later on. But the idea is that these are the bills, and very clear, non-threatening. But we've also been told by two leaders. Now this is interesting. We've been told by a Senate leader and a House leader, one from each party, is that, hey, we hear you, but go sit over there for the time being. Right now, everything is geared around November. Nothing is more important than my reelection and the reelection of our buddies here. And that's it. And there's no getting around. You've seen some bad behavior in the Harrisburg House with some bad partisan legislation. And I think that's just kind of foaming at the mouth, sending a message, nonsense that's gone down here. So in the House, particularly all the relationships we've cultivated in the both state government committees in the House and the Senate in Harrisburg, that's where we're spending our time, plus talking to leadership. So the idea was, we've been told by two different leaders, you got to come back in January. Don't bother us now. Even though we had a moral victory in the Senate State Government Committee with the passage out of the committee of Senate Bill 1242, and that was 8-3, and that included 4 Republicans. However, they're all focused on their reelections, certainly in the House, since it's every 2 years, and half of the Senate is running again for reelection. And what's interesting, we also have some folks who are bailing out. Some legislators are retiring, and boy, it's hard to get through to them. They're not that focused, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is we're not biding our time. In Montgomery County, I'm still messaging certain districts to say, well, even if Joe or Sally wins or loses, keep pumping those messages out that we're watching, we're waiting, and we're coming back. So for fair districts, we know that this is how it's played. We maintain civil relationships, because if you're just hurling mud against the wall, you lose. We've learned that. And I've had I don't know if you know Rabbi Michael Pollack. Michael is the leader of March on Harrisburg. And I like him. His speeches are fabulous. You can see why he gets fired up. But when I see him at overlapping events, I said, Michael, are you sure? Are you sure this confrontation approach is working? I know it feels good for a day or two. Some of your folks can't walk this far anymore. But I just don't think that's the right way to go about it, So why don't you run? We need power and we need influence on the inside. So, but it's interesting that we've been told very clearly by leadership of legal women voters as well as fair districts as civil discourse. There's effective ways, letters to the editor, light and heat, but not in a way that will turn away a legislator, even though we have some who never return my calls, never want to meet with their constituents, just never want to talk about this. And all I tell them is, well, okay, remember we just need 51% of the vote. Right. We don't need 100%. So and I'm not going to name names right now, but I've certainly had some intense conversations with some local legislators in Montgomery County whose self-interest rules the day. That's all I'm going to say. Mm-hmm. That's all I'll say. I'm not going to name names, but except to say that it's both parties.
So in January, that's going to be the newly seated representatives?
Yep.
Okay, gotcha.
What we're going to be doing, we expect N number will be reelected, but what we did in January of 2019 is that in Montgomery County, I, along with Carol Cohnholm and some other folks from fair districts, met with a number of newly elected legislators. And they came because we talked about whether you're for us or against us, that's great, but here's what we're coming with. And we also focused, and this was a big deal too, we focused on House rules, particularly, literally there's a book in the Pennsylvania General Assembly, the House of Representatives, 203 representatives. There's a book of conduct that says this is how things work. And there's some unbelievable stuff in there as well. So what we focused on was less on our legislation. This was talking about December, but we said we want to educate you on the rules of the House and what you're facing, because you have no clue how quickly your power will be diminished. Your influence will be brushed aside because of these rules that favor committee chairs and leaders to dictate exactly what we're going to vote on, what we're going to talk about, and what our agenda is going to be. So it's an eye-opener for everybody. So where we're coming from is we're planning again in December to have those same kind of rallies again with legislators to tell them, hey, you met us, maybe you got reelected, congratulations, or you're new. This is what you're heading into, because it's how things work behind the scenes that dictate the results. And we also let them know that we're pressing hard for legislation, our legislation to be passed. We think it can work. We get legislation passed in January, February, or March, plenty of time to put into play, because that map drawing process begins in May, June, July, and kind of rolls its way through until October or so. We don't want that to happen. There's no reason, but we don't want the repeat of 2011 where nothing was talked about until the leaders, the majority leaders, unveiled these three maps for Congress, state Senate, and state reps. And they're being told, the minions are being told, just raise your hand when we say who approves these maps.
Right.
So we'll be very, very busy, but we hope and think it's a very non-threatening message, focusing on transparency and common sense restraint. Sounds pretty non-threatening, huh?
Absolutely. And I think that's, also, I think, very appealing to a lot of members of Beth Am, that, activism that is non-confrontational, that is done by building coalitions, that's done by talking to people about the issues, that's bipartisan or even nonpartisan. This is an issue that affects anybody from all sides of the aisle, as you mentioned, or the middle of the aisle if you're an independent. So, there's a lot of things here. And then I guess it sounds like, for now, people should be focusing on, they're not Star Wars droids, but HB 2638 and SB 1242.
I think, Jamil, just let folks know that, redistricting, all the new maps is not a 2020 focus. It's going to burn bright starting in the middle of 2021. The good news is locally, the Inquirer and some other papers have been very good, on this issue, and they keep bringing up with those, oh, by the way, did you know kind of articles, which are terrific. But right now we're not trying to compete with the emotion and the investment of this election coming up right now. We just know we're coming back, give everybody 4-6 weeks, maybe we hope, to calm down, take a breath, revive yourself, whatever happens, I don't know. But the idea is we're coming back strong in 2021 because we think there's going to be lots of people in Pennsylvania, certainly in January, saying, okay, what do we got to work on now? I hope, and I hope that's true. I know the Common Cause thinks the same way, and all the folks working on other, ground floor issues that really need desperate reform in this state. This is a tough state. Pennsylvania is a very tough state to get change in. We've certainly learned. We live where we live down in southeastern Pennsylvania, where, maybe we're a little more open to reforms, perhaps. It's not so easy. I mean, it's amazing the interesting but civil conversations I've had with folks from other parts of just Montgomery County who aren't so close to Philadelphia or the metro area, who don't have that kind of point of view. They grew up in a different kind of culture, a different point of view of how government should work for them. So, you learn the other lesson, which is stop talking, start listening, and understand as best as you can that there's multiple points of view here, and you've got to factor that in as well.
Yeah, but by and large, people all over the state from all walks of life feel like the government maybe isn't working for them, and so again, if you're looking for an issue where you can have common cause, so to speak, with people that maybe you wouldn't have common cause with on other issues that may fall on one part of the spectrum, the left or the right. This is an issue that you could be working with people that you wouldn't normally be working with, to make the government work for us. So,
and I hope so. I think, a lot of folks, I've seen some surveys out there where, what are the biggest problems? Why isn't government working for regular folks? And, you see a typical 2 or 3 responses. One is money, the dark money or money in politics. And most folks can't compete with that. Number 2 is, we think, is certainly redistricting or gerrymandering and how maps are done to negate people's vote. So we think that's a big issue as well. And then thirdly, it's a legislature that pays more attention to lobbyists or other so-called, I hate the phrase, but the special interests, as opposed to regular issues with regular voters, their own constituents. So, but in Pennsylvania, all the surveys that we've done indicate, certainly with redistricting reform, overwhelmingly, a large majority want reform once you explain the issue. We've done, in not just Montgomery County, statewide, we've reached out to local municipal government, whether it's, we've been everywhere. I've done 28, I think we've got 28 resolutions passed just with municipal governments in Montgomery County who says, yes, we agree. And that's I got to tell you, that's in some tough municipalities where they don't necessarily agree with everything else that they think you're for. So we have to disavow that as well. So, but when you add up all these so-called local government resolutions, that adds up to over 70% of the population of Pennsylvania who agree that how it's done today doesn't work. Reform is required. Let's go.
That's amazing. I mean, how many issues is there 70% agreement, right, these days?
Not a whole lot.
Not a whole lot. So, well, Rich, it's been great working with you since the Social Justice Committee kind of got going with some of these efforts, that we can get the congregation involved with. And it sounds like we'll be working with you some more. It was great to get to know you a little bit and also hear kind of just what's been going on down there in Harrisburg and how we can help.
You bet. Well, when I hear from you and Sarah, I mean, this kind of activism that you're doing is the proper activism, and it's very encouraging and reassuring that folks like you are getting engaged and encouraging your congregation to stay with it. You know what? You can actually, if you can turn this into a little bit of enjoyable fun, you can. It's not a heavy slog. Remember, you're fighting for the right things, and that helps you. There, I'll end up by saying that helps you sleep at night.
That's great. We could all use that.
Gotta change around here. Gotta change around here. Can't go on this way. Things gotta change around here. Say it loud, say it clear. Things gonna change around here. Fingers on the trigger around here. Fingers on the trigger around here. Bullets flying, mothers crying. We gotta change around here. Get it straight, be sure that you hear. Things gonna change around here. What good is freedom if we haven't learned to be free? What good is freedom if we haven't learned to be free? Day after day, year after year, we got gotta change around here. Is the letter, blue is the color, 1 is the number, now is the time. Gonna change around here, gotta change around here. Say it loud, say it clear, we gotta change around here. Gotta change around here, gotta change around here. Yeah. Lord, gotta change around here. Say it loud, say it clear. We gotta change around here.